So, welcome NBN Co. Mr. Morrow and team, thank you for joining us. We're on a very tight time frame tonight. Now, I wonder, in the interest of time, if you have an opening statement, would it be best to table it, unless there are things you want to get on record before we do proceed to questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it would please the committee, I will greatly abbreviate the opening statement to 5 minutes or less, and then we will table the rest for the benefit of the committee members.
Okay, that'll be great.
If that's acceptable. Thank you. Thank you, Senator. So with me today is Stephen Rue, our Chief Financial Officer, and Karina Keisler, our Chief Corporate Affairs Officer. Now, NBN has never been far from the headlines, but the last few weeks have been particularly active. We don't shy away from scrutiny, and you will have seen the company out in the media presenting the facts to be sure that there is an informed view. With this same objective in mind, I would like to inform the committee of a few key points. First, there continues to be allegations that the current concerns are a consequence of the MTM model and would not have existed if we stayed with the 92% fiber model. Digging trenches, building nodes, and pulling cable will inevitably create issues that will result in customer complaints, despite the best efforts of a good plan. This is just as it relates to the work of NBN. The involved processes, systems, and customer interactions with the RSPs also add to the likelihood of something going wrong. It's easy to assume this all must be due to the existing copper and pay TV networks, but the previous rollout, before MTM, had its share of bad stories too. Remember, in June of 2013, there were 163,000 premises declared RFS. 34% of these were Service Class 0 and could not order a service, pushing out the ready-to-connect time to frames to dates unknown. If that's not enough, consider the people of Western Australia, where this percentage was actually closer to 70%. Construction partners tried their best but found themselves in serious legal disputes, at odds with management, and even downed their tools, leaving homeowners stranded without a connection. These problems were due not only to the poor culture, but also due to the high cost and difficulty of taking fiber all the way into the home. Now, I've also heard Dubbo being used as an example of the new digital divide. This is an absolute insult to the many thousands of Australians who have no access to decent broadband at all and who are waiting for the NBN. A city where almost everyone can order faster speeds than they require is not a city divided. The real digital divide is between people who can do all that they want online and those who cannot. We know that 90% of the premises in Dubbo that are on FTTN have selected 25 megabits or less plans. If there was a digital divide, wouldn't they all be clamoring for higher plans, or at least the available 50 megabit per second plans? And what about the other side of town that has FTTP? Is there a massive difference for them in the speeds that they choose? Well, not really. 85% have still felt that they are happy with 25 megabit per second or less. In fact, more people in FTTP areas are choosing the very lowest speed tier than those in the FTTN areas, with the 12 megabit per second plan making up 30% of FTTP and only 23% for FTTN. At least for now, the desire to pay for the higher speeds is not evident in the market, and the access technology doesn't make a material difference. But the Dubbo study reveals far more than FTTN technology being sufficient for today's needs. It demonstrates how FTTN is faster to deploy and cheaper to build, and let me explain very quickly. NBN's 3-year plan from April 2013 said that Dubbo was supposed to have begun construction in March of 2013, and the last module was due to start at the end of 2017, meaning that it would basically be finished around the end of 2018, or almost 6 years later, if all went to plan. Now, because of the switch to MTM, however, we began in 2014 and finished the entire town by June of 2016, more than 2 years ahead of that original schedule. On top of this, we saved $15 million by completing Dubbo with FTTN, and we did that in a third of the time that it took us to do the FTTP areas. Now extrapolate those numbers across the country and you can quickly see that Dubbo is in fact an example of how we are closing the real digital divide as quickly as possible and at the same time keeping costs down so our internet bills are also as low as possible. Now I've heard some argue that the lower speeds that are on fiber are due to our prices being too high. Well, imagine what they'd be if we had to take the longer and spend more money associated with that previous more fiber plan. Now, second, it's suggested that we can build FTTP for the same price as New Zealand. We have debunked this comparison with facts and realities that were based on decisions back in 2009 and are now irreversible today. So anyone who is interested in why New Zealand's cost per premise is different to ours should read the blog on our website, which goes into detail. But should you have any questions tonight, Stephen and I are here to help. Now, third, it is suggested that because of NBN, we are now worse off with internet speeds than third world countries. Equally so here, we can explain why it is misleading to compare the speeds across Australia with Kenya, where just 2% of the population have access to fixed broadband. Our average AVC speed purchased by the RSPs is over 30 megabit per second. If Akamai, the company doing these reports, looks solely at the NBN circuits, we would be at or near the top of their list. Now, I'm sure we'll get into some of this tonight, so I'll just close very quickly here, Senator, with a quick update on our progress since we last met. As of last week, we're now up to 6.2 million premises that are ready to connect and more than 3 million end users active on the NBN network. We have released our FY17 results, our annual report, and our 2018 to 2021 corporate plan. The headline results from the last financial year are exceeding targets by near doubling of premises ready for service, exceeding targets by more than doubling active end users, and exceeding targets by more than doubling revenue. We remain on track to complete the network build by 2020 within the $49 billion peak funding envelope and while maintaining our internal rate of return between 3.2 and 3.7%. Now, what's more, in our first year of post-build in 2021, NBN will be cash flow positive and see $5.4 billion in revenue from 8.6 million active services. Mr. Chair, we do have more that we'll say, but we'll table that at your request. Thank you for the time to produce that statement.
Thank you, Mr. Morrow. We'll start with Senator Ketter.
Mr. Morrow, thanks for your opening statement. And I've got 5 minutes, so I'll try to cover a couple of issues, and I understand if you want to take some of this on notice. But firstly, in relation to the vulnerability of the network to extreme weather events, and we know that in Mackay, for example, after Cyclone Debbie, there are a couple of nodes that were impacted by the cyclone, which were taken out. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is the vulnerability of the copper to flooding, etc. Is this something you're looking at in terms of the fact we're coming into summer? More and more households are having NBN. And I know that in 2003, and there are varying reports on this, but in 2003, I think Telstra executives told a Senate broadband inquiry that the century-old network was at 5 minutes to midnight, needed to be upgraded within the next 15 years. So you might dispute how robust the copper network is at the moment. But I'm just interested in your response to that, and then I've got another issue I'd like to...
Well, thank you, Senator.
Is that something you're working on? Do you have a unit looking at this particular issue?
Yes, Senator. So first of all, we look at weather-prone areas to ensure that we design a network that can withstand some of those Mother Nature-related issues. As we saw the cyclones run through your particular area, we felt the network did hold up very well. We took extra precaution in those node placements and protecting those nodes, ensuring that there were generators on site when power was lost. And we believe that the crews performed magnificently to be able to keep service up and working for many of the residents of Queensland during that very difficult time. Also, Senator, when it comes to the copper, you are correct that copper is more prone to wet conditions causing faults than other technologies. We do take precaution here of looking at our copper circuits. We have developed recent tools that will help us isolate if there is dampness in the cable so we can dispatch crews to go out and remediate that cable. If a cable of copper is properly sealed with the joints that go in these pits, there should be no problem with that pit flooding. If the pits are constructed correctly, sealed correctly, they should not be exposed to water either. This is something that the team is looking at to be sure that it is properly built and or properly remediated so it can withstand these sorts of inclement
On that
weather
issue, do you have any
conditions.
stats as to the number of situations you've come across where you've got pits affected by flooding?
We do have some research data, Senator. I don't have that handy, but I'm happy to
Yes,
take that on
thank you.
notice for you.
Secondly, I've got a issue affecting a constituent in Queensland, a lady by the name of Susan Donald, who has, at the moment, she is taking her children to the local McDonald's to get access to Wi-Fi. She's been waiting all year for the NBN to be connected, and she's had problems. Telstra haven't been able to help her because NBN's coming. She's raised the issue. We've raised the matter on her behalf with your government relations people, and we found that it's been explained to us that the issue is the delay in commissioning our compact sealed DSLAMs, CSDs or micronodes, and the delay is because we're in the process of implementing a new and improved process for activating premises served by these CSDs. And I think these premises are too far away from the node cabinet to receive the minimum speed of 25.5. So can you firstly be very interested in if you could come back to us about Ms Donald specifically. She's been told that she's going to be connected in next month, but because of the fact she's been told a number of things by NBN over recent months, I do have I've got a inquiry number 01224181. So she's very sceptical about whether she's going to get connected in November. So that's the first point. The second point is the new and improved process for activating premises served by these CSDs. How many people are affected by that?
So thank you, Senator. We will look into your particular constituent's case to see what's happening there. We do, of course, want to get everybody connected as soon as possible, and the nation right now is a bit over halfway done, but we still have another 6 million or 5 million homes to go before we are complete. In terms of the compact DSLAMs that are out there, we are always looking at new technology to be able to keep the cost down and keep the speed of the rollout going up. We know some people are informed that they have these little cabinets out there to deal with less dense distributed homes. These cabinets do work really well. We've had a program turning them up. I believe we're within a matter of weeks away from having all of them turned up and ready for service. So if she is served by that particular technology, it should come on literally within a month.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks,
Chair.
Senator Keller. Senator Griff.
Thank you, Chair. I note in the annual report that almost $2.5 million in bonus payments were made to senior execs. Would that be correct?
I believe so, Stephen. Does that sound right?
And
That does sound right, yeah.
that's despite the company making a net loss of $4.2 billion and despite an increase of 160% increase in NBN-related complaints recently to the TIO. Am I right in understanding the bonuses are measured against the 5 strategic imperatives listed on page 68 of the annual report?
Partially based on those, Senator, yes. There's very specific guidelines that we are measured against for bonuses that are in the annual report. That is spelled out, yes.
The key one is a high-performing and reliable network. Yet there have been lots of complaints, obviously, about the quality of service delivered over particularly FTTN, poor speeds and so forth. Has that had any impact on the bonuses at all, or the bonus payments that were made?
Now, the customer experience, there is a customer experience measure that the board evaluates management on and determines a certain level of the bonus as to whether that is paid out. The board chose not to pay out on that particular measure, as that could have been better for last year. So that was factored into the bonus that was approved by the Remuneration Committee of the board.
So, Mr Morrow, that would have affected yours too. Yours fell by 7% in 2017?
That's correct.
And that was a reflection of the performance that you've just referred to?
That's correct.
Okay. Am I correct that the bonuses across the organisation amounted to $109 million in 2016-17?
Where are you seeing that, Senator?
That's up from 96 mil. That's in the annual report.
Can you point me to
I'll
where
have to
you see
refer
that?
to the page.
I think you're referring to page 116. That includes other expenses as well, Senator.
Okay.
It's not.
On page 67 of the annual report, it says there must be a minimum level of performance achieved by NBN before any STI payments can be earned. Was that minimum level, what was that minimum level set at?
So the board has taken the decision that before any remuneration relative to bonus would be paid out to management, it wants to first see if there was a safe culture involved for the people working in the field, the people working in the offices, for the local communities. That's almost a gate to get through before bonuses will be considered. The second is just the overall financial position. This gets into financial integrity. It gets into whether or not the finances are coming together like the company management had forecasted. That's the second gate. When those two gates are passed, then there is a number of other measures that are weighted as far as to what the payout will be. The board has made the decision that those two gates were met, so they were comfortable paying a bonus. The amount of the bonus then reflected those different measures of the build, the end users, the revenue, and the customer satisfaction.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Morrow. I'll put the others on notice. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator Griff. Senator Urquhart.
Oh, sorry, I didn't get a chance to say hello to you earlier.
Hello.
I just want to just make a bit of a statement, and I think Senator Chisholm's going to lead off with some questions. But I've been watching with amusement, but mostly concern, over the past few days as NBN spun itself into a bit of a frenzy. Now, I want to say this with due respect, Mr Morrow, because while we've had some robust discussions in this committee, and I think that's a good description of what we've done, Labor recognises that you often seek to strike a challenging balance. We understand that. We also understand that while the buck stops with you, you may perhaps not always be across everything that is happening. But some of the activity that we've seen over the past few days was, to be frank, quite disappointing and unfortunately not befitting a government enterprise, a government business enterprise. I think it would be more desirable if a more professional posture was adopted from a company whose job description is to be a wholesale network operator. We respectfully suggest it would be wise for you to reflect on whether you have the right counsel. And that's all I want to say on the matter, and I'll now hand over to Senator Chisholm.
So, just a
I have
statement.
nothing further to say.
Well, I just will make the point that when others have purportedly made statements and not followed up with a question,
and being
you've
quite
taken
happy to be allowed to
and
deliver them.
you've taken a point of order, but I just wanted to put that on record. So you're happy to do it yourself, but take points of order on others. So, Senator Chisholm, you have questions?
I do. Sorry, can I just, with your
Yes,
indulgence, Chair, just take the opportunity to express the absolute confidence that the government has in the work of Mr Morrow and his management team. I'm not sure what Senator Urquhart was specifically referring to, but I think Mr Morrow is someone who always tries to make himself available to explain to NBN how it works and what it's endeavouring to achieve, and I won't say any more than that.
Minister, Mr Morrow is an able man, and I'm sure he can read between the lines, and I'll leave it at that.
So,
Thanks, Chair.
Look, no more commentary, reading between lines or anything like that. Well, is there anything you would like to explain at some point on notice?
I think Mr Morrow can work that out.
Honestly,
I'm
I
happy
haven't
to
a
refer.
clue as to what you're talking about. And I
Do you want to
am
explain,
happy if
Senator
I am
Erkin?
wrong at something, Senator, admit it. So I lay it out on the table. Let's deal with it.
No,
If someone
it's
sent in a
fine.
note to read out,
You might
that's
want to
fine,
reflect
but
it in solitude, but I'm happy for Senator
you don't want to explain what
Chisholm.
you've just said?
I'm happy for Senator Chisholm
Senator
to keep
Chisholm,
going
do you
with
want to explain what
questions.
Senator Urquhart's just said? Or?
No, he's got questions.
Oh, you've got questions, what we're here for. Okay, let's go to those. Senator Chisholm.
Just picking up on your opening statement, and one thing that just sort of struck me was basically you getting in and saying that there isn't a digital divide, and you highlighted Dubbo. People in regional areas often pay more for services. It's just the nature, and I think when it comes to internet services, they pay slightly more than people in the city do. Would you concede that maybe part of the reason why they aren't clamouring for higher speeds is they actually just can't afford it?
Senator, that may in fact be the case. We have not spoken to any of those individuals. The point that I was merely making was that whether you were on FTTP or FTTN, we do not see a material difference in terms of the products that you choose. And remember, the price is the same for both of them. So even when we look at the 1 million customers that are on fibre to the premise today, there is no real material evidence that people want the higher speeds that the fibre is capable of, that they're willing to pay more for those speeds. We see roughly the same 25 and 12 meg products purchased on fibre as we do fibre to the node. That was merely the point that I was making with that statement.
I think, though, that you've got to be careful if you're not factoring in the cost. That you're saying, like, what you're seeing in terms of speed is not going. It actually might be the cost of that. That's the barrier for people for going for high speed.
It's a great point, Senator, and this is where I've had many discussions with a lot of the industry experts that have been doing this for quite a while in Australia, and they asked me the question, well, I'm used to buying a wholesale service from Telstra for ADSL. I'm paying NBN more money for that. Why do I have to do that? And this is what I have tried to explain in a few blogs and a number of the interviews that we've done. Because the decision was taken back in 2009 to have a completely separate company than what the incumbent or Telstra was, NBN is obligated to pay Telstra a lot of money to lease their ducts, to have rack space in the exchanges, to have access to those pits. And that amount of money that we need to recover actually does lift the price up that we have to pay to consumers. And this is a little bit why I feel like, and again, I'm just a middle person here, I don't set policy, but on one hand, I get the argument that, well, NBN should be building the more expensive fiber, and on the other hand, it's too expensive, we have to lower the cost. But the cheaper MTM model that's faster to build keeps that internet price down to where I'm in conflict. If we have to spend more money on the network, that means the price has to go up, but that's not what people are willing to do either. And then when we look at a choice that's given, that if somebody has 12, 25, 50, and 100 speeds available to them, the large propensity do choose the lower speeds. And Senator, I'll point out that the difference is often just a matter of dollars, single-digit dollars between the two on the prices. Our 25 meg product is $27 AVC. Our 50 meg product, twice the speed, is only $34. So for a $7 difference, you can double your speed, but the RSPs do not feel that the consumers are interested in that.
Sure, I don't want to labour this point because it's not the main one I want to make, but I'd just be very careful if I were you being sort of flippant about just $7. For a lot of people, that's a big difference, and I think in terms of your commentary, I think you've just got to be careful to not think that people aren't going for more speeds when price isn't a factor.
A fair point, Senator, and if we could have lower costs, we would. Unfortunately, the hand was dealt us before we arrived here. I can tell you that we've done the analysis. The monies that we pay to Telstra equate to $15 a month per customer that we have to recover. The cost that we have to pay to get to these very remote homes that were never economical to begin with. Think about this, Senator. Roughly 2 million homes in this country had no access to broadband, which I love about NBN. Our employees love about NBN. We bring a degree of equality in giving everybody access by this business model. But those loss-making homes That's why the investors never went there. It's why Telstra didn't build there. It's why Optus didn't build there. That we have to recover $7 a month for. So $22 a month comes from the nature of the way NBN was set up and the remit that was given from the former regime and the current regime. So that $22 adds to this $52 we often talk about that we need to be able to get that ARPU level up to pay for this network. If we didn't have that, we're talking about a $30 cost base that now is better than what you see in New Zealand, better than what you see in the UK or Germany, and in fact comparable to what many people were paying for ADSL2 services before. So it isn't an issue of us just wanting to jack up the charges and make consumers pay more. It's in order for us as the users to pay for those 2 million people that didn't have anything before, to pay for the fact that we're using Telstra's services. It's just a matter of the maths that add up, Senator.
We'll continue this another day. What I did want to talk about is wireless, and I just wanted to check in about what is the current long-term assumption about mobile wireless take-up rates underpinning the 2018 NBN corporate plan.
So I believe, Senator, what you're asking is we anticipate in this economic model, we expect to get up to the $52 level, right around there. And we expect to have 75% of the homes that we cover taking up our service. The 25% that we don't anticipate using NBN is largely made up by homes that have decided to use wireless as an alternative technology or other forms of competition, or maybe they don't want any sort of internet within their house at all. And we've used some, I think, early estimates that we anticipated about 15%, Stephen?
Correct, yes.
That would actually, those homes would be served by wireless solutions rather than the NBN type of a solution.
Okay, and is that a take-up rate that's assumed out to a period?
So typically what we do is we look at when an area is declared ready to for service, the RSPs are allowed to start marketing and selling into it. There's an 18-month window before the Telstra traditional services are turned off. At that point is when we measure this take-up rate, and we're currently seeing 75%. And this is now, I think, 1.5 million homes that have gone through this particular 18-month window. So it's a strong sample size that gives us a good indication that, as it stands right now, 75% take-up rate is realistic in our plan.
Okay. So is that 15% figure I think you mentioned, is that the number that's underlying the current corporate plan?
I believe
Yes, it is.
And do you think that that's a prudent take-up rate, or do you think that it's going to grow over time at a faster rate? I note that there was some recent comments by your chairman that improvements in wireless as a competitive proposition has been faster than what the NBN had anticipated.
Yeah, to explain that, Senator, so we look at wireless. We are a wireless provider ourselves that we are currently serving. I think we have 200,000 homes already on our fixed wireless network today. And we expect that to grow to double that, near double that in the future. We are always looking at the technology evolution. So from 4G to 5G as an example, or we look at the antenna technology that's used today, and they have these things called MIMO and direct beam forming and other enhancements that just get better spectral efficiency, better radio reach, and therefore you can pump more data bits over this. We not only look at it for the application of NBN, but we also look at it from an application of competitive threat. And this is what our chairman's referring to is that while 5G seems to be a little bit further out on the horizon of what people had thought, this enhanced 4G, if I can call it that, using this advanced technology on the antenna systems is coming sooner than what we had thought. So we do see, and we're glad that we built in a buffer in terms of how much competition would come from wireless, because we do see that in some cases, not all, as an alternative access to broadband internet. And so we're glad that we built that into our business plan. We see that materializing. We keep an eye on it to see just if it's going to grow beyond what the business plan has, but right now we're comfortable with the levels that we've put forward.
So the 15% is in the current business plan, but it has been modelled effectively out to 2040. Is that the case?
I think it's really, we look at it, quite frankly, over the course of the next 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And then we take some averages thereafter.
Yeah, we model it out to 2022, actually, Senator, and then we take, from then on, we just take growth rates in revenue and costs, as we've explained before.
So the model to 2022, has it growing to?
It has it at 15%.
So remaining static?
Correct.
Okay. So then at the end of that period, you look at what the difference is and then sort of assume a model after that, is that?
That's correct.
Every year we'll look at kind of a rolling horizon. So next year we'll look at another year out in that picture. We always try to cast forward how soon we think technology developments will come in. Is that an opportunity or is that a threat to it? It's an annual process we go through.
So in terms of that, I imagine there's sort of, well, you've sort of said how you've sort of effectively managed risk around new technology, and you've had that in mind from the start. But is a particular technology footprint more exposed to wireless competition in terms of speed, reliability than another technology?
So I think we would see that, first of all, wireless type of an approach is going to be only suitable for a moderate to low user. So we have today now on average 165 gigabytes per month, average per customer over the 3 million customers. That would crush a mobile network unless it had a massive capital investment put into it to be able to handle that. We have not heard anything or seen anything around the world of people saying, I'm going to take my existing mobile network, advance that to a fixed wireless application to serve that kind of data consumption. So what we believe is that for a very light user, you might find an opportunity for fixed wireless to come in and be the only technology that gives broadband access. The locations of this are going to be very dense areas because this is typically already where the mobile companies have erected their towers. They already have laid out an infrastructure plan that they'll build on top of to be able to do this. In those areas, if I take where we have anything above 50 megabits per second, I'm not so worried about the competition. If we have an area that is only restricted to 25 megabits per second and it's a light user and there's a mobile tower nearby, that is susceptible to infrastructure competition.
Okay. And from an NBN point of view, does that mean that you decipher between the risk being to fibre to the node versus fibre to the premises, or is there a divide in terms of how you see that? What is at greater risk?
No, so it wouldn't be on the speed side of it. Obviously, I wouldn't be worried about anything with the fibre to the prem. I wouldn't be worried about anything with HFC. We would look closely at the tail end of the circuits on FTTN where we're not putting FTTC in those places. So in those cases, again, where I kind of come down to call it 25% of the FTTN network would be the first cohort that we'd look at. Then we would look at the density factor of the homes in those areas. And then we would look at where are the mobile towers already existing for the mobile players that could likely use this enhanced technology with their enhanced spectrum to be able to provide a service that does not rely on NBN. And this is why we're comfortable that we've modeled this out so well that we feel that our current business plan is sufficient. But we watch it closely because if there is a material change to that, then we're going to have to adjust the plan accordingly.
Okay. So when you say model it out so well, does that include modelling to map both the speed and capabilities of wireless and the cost per gigabyte over the next 5-10 years?
Yes, it does. Well, we look at it closely. There's still a lot of things that are evolving. 5G has a lot of moving parts associated with Senator, but we do believe that wireless is a viable alternative in certain circumstances for broadband access. Again, if you're a low user, if you're in a dense area, if you've already got a tower installed, and the competition, has limitations based on network speed availability.
Just in regards to the NBN, what is the median, so not average, but the median download usage on the NBN?
So I think it's roughly about 60
something.
gig, just over 60 gigabytes per customer per month.
And just in terms of the wireless take-up rate assumptions, is there any reason why they were provided in the 2016 and 2017 corporate plan, but omitted in the 2018 corporate plan?
Is this the 15%?
Yeah.
No particular reason. I think we reiterated the 73 to 75% take-up rate, so it's implicit within there.
And sorry, the take-up rate.
Yeah, in other words, the other side of the equation, the 73 to 75% of people would take NBN. So implicit in there is the wireless 15% assumption.
Okay. And is there any advice or evidence that that would be revised in terms of the take-up rate?
No, because what we're seeing today, as Mr. Morrow just said, is exactly that forecast, that on the 1.5 million that's past that 18 months, we're seeing that take-up. And that has not changed over the last year, so there's no reason for us to change it at this stage.
Okay.
But we do keep a close eye on it, Senator. We monitor what the mobile carrier movements are. We monitor what people are doing overseas. Right now, we take some comfort, but again, we keep an eye on it.
Okay. So just to be clear on this, and I'll be specific, have you provided any advice to the shareholding ministers or departments indicating that the take-up rate should be revised?
No, we talk about the competitive threats. We talk about technology evolution. We talk about how we might use 5G in our own network build. Is that an alternative lead-in? Those are the sorts of discussions that we have.
Okay. Just one final question from me for the moment. Just coming back to that 15% rate. Can we assume that that is basically underpinning the financials out to 2040 for the moment? Obviously, you mentioned that in 2022 that would potentially be reassessed.
Senator, it's very difficult after the 4 or 5 year period. There's lots of extrapolations, and you get into statistics to be able to do regression analysis to be able to get out that far. As you can appreciate, who can sit here and predict what 2040 is going to look like from a technology landscape point of view? There are offsetting issues. Today, we assume that there is almost one connection per household, and we're going to get 75% of those households within our remit of pulling in revenue. The future may have multiple connections. You may see people saying, I need 2 or 3 connections within the same home because I have something that monitors security, others that monitor my appliances. It's very hard to predict, and this was the same dilemma that the mobile industry had as well, of what the penetration rate is of devices, and you look at average devices, I think 3 or 4 per person now around the country. So it's when you talk about 20 years down the road and you think about history like the mobile space, it's just going to change and it's going to be different. And so one variable may be lower and the other variable may be higher. That's why we take caution when we say what the 2040 plan is going to look like, but it is the best estimate that management can come up with at this point in time.
That's all well and interesting, and is the point I'd just make again, is that mean that you use that 15% rate for the 2040?
No, we use that rate for the period at which we model out in detail the plan. And then at that point in time, we use the revenues and the costs to extrapolate a long-term plan. And as Mr. Morrow said, that's the best you can do on the information you have. So the long-term plan is, as I said, it's just an extrapolation. Multiple things will happen in that period of time. But it is true to say it is what underpins the plan until that 2022 period. Yes.
Okay. So
one of the things, that underpins the plan.
Sure, but So when you extrapolate the plan to 2040, you obviously use a wireless percentage.
No, we use the revenue at 2022, and that revenue can move from multiple things. As Mr. Morrow just said, there may be more than one connection. There could be new technologies. There could be new revenue streams. Lots of things will happen between 2022 and 2040.
So which bits of that are built into your revenue forecast then?
The 2022 revenues and costs are used to extrapolate out into 2040, as anybody would do in a long-range plan. This isn't a nuance to NBN. This is how long-range plans are done. They're done in detail for 5 years, and then they're just the final. Well, in our case, 5 years. Some people may do 3, some may do 4, but you then take the end point and extrapolate that forward, because
So embedded in that end point is the 15% assumption.
now
So
embedded in the 2022 number is.
Yeah, exactly. So, and if you're carrying that forward, then
No.
that's embedded in what you're carrying forward as a revenue forecast, isn't it?
No, that revenue is used as a basis for purely an extrapolation out beyond 2022. That doesn't. Multiple things will change, Senator, between 2022 and 2040.
So wouldn't the revenue extrapolation implicitly carries that assumption through to 2040 though?
It carries it through to the revenue, but it is purely an extrapolation from there. I wouldn't be assuming that all the assumptions, multiple assumptions are in to create that revenue in 2022. Multiple assumptions. I wouldn't assume that all those assumptions are carried forward for the next 18 years.
Sure, I think we got there. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Morrow.
Hello.
And Mr. Rue, welcome back. I just want to pick up a couple of points from your opening statement. And the first one here is where you say in your opening statement, I've heard some argue that lower speeds that are on fibre are due to our prices being too high. Well, imagine what they'd be if we'd had to take longer and spend more money. Now, in relation to the pricing, you answered in response to Senator Chisholm. You made some comments about some unfortunate deals in terms of cost associated with Telstra contracts. And can you just go through the figures that you were saying? So, average subscriber, those deals cost about, what, $15, did you say, more per household on average?
You want to, Stephen? Well, he did the analysis on this.
So there are the agreements that were put in place to originally set up NBN back in 2011. That was then revised, but not financially revised, but revised operationally a few years later. Embedded in the business, 3 main costs. One cost was for leasing dark fibre, leasing ducts, leasing exchange racks. Mm-hmm. The second was an embedded cost, which is a prescriber payment as people come off the Telstra, and as people disconnect from the Telstra network to move on to NBN, there's a payment to Telstra. And the third one is an equivalent, although slightly different calculation for Optus. Those 3 costs are embedded in our long-term model, and our rate of return actually recovers a return on those costs, in effect. If those costs were not in our business, so just to be clear on what they are, when you get to around about 2020, we're talking about $1 billion a year in lease costs, and we're talking about $10 billion over the plan set out in our corporate plan.
So that's by 2020, $1 billion per year?
Per year for multiple years. And then there is one-off costs which amount, as you'll see in our corporate plan, to around about $10 billion. If those 2 streams, which are made up of those 3 payments, didn't exist, to get the same rate of return as we have in our plan, we could have $15 less ARPU.
On average for households?
Correct. In other words, per month, households, we would charge the retailers. What the retailers choose to do, of course, is up to them, but we could charge the retailers $15 less per month.
This, Senator, when we look and we compare prices in other countries, so AT&T in the US and BT in the UK, or Deutsche Telekom Germany, Chorus in New Zealand, this is why they can build out cheaper, because these costs have been something that's been a part on their balance sheet for 20, 30, 40 years. So the cost has already been fully recovered, or mostly all recovered. And I believe, now this is just speculation, I don't have the facts on this, but this is why Telstra when they submitted their bid to do this, they could have done it cheaper because they don't need to pay themselves that sort of money. So this is just a fact. It's not whether or not it's good or bad, but when we get asked why are we more expensive, we want to just explain this and be quite open and transparent about it.
And then the other cost that Mr. Morrow referred to is the $7 effective subsidy. For there's around about 2 million homes in Australia that don't or would not be economic to roll out if you're just looking at pure economics. That's a further $7. So again, if the sum total of those are $22.
So coming back to the first one, the average of $15, so the $1 billion from 2020 plus ongoing, very nice little payday under that contract. So the reason that you have to pay that now, you're locked in to pay that, is because of the 2011 contract that was done by the previous government with Telstra. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So,
well, I like to talk. I think it was 2011. Yes, it was 2011.
So 2011, so that was clearly, as you said, when it was set up before your time, Mr. Morrow. So that's a gift that we'll keep on giving to Telstra for many years. At all of us who've got NBN now, we pay an extra $22 a month because of that contract, correct?
Well, no.
15
no,
for that.
15 plus the 7,
Correct.
which subsidises
the 2 million.
the 2 million who were not. Thank you.
For equality in the country, yes.
Can I also now go to second point of interest to me in your opening statement was you made the point, you said, second, it is suggested that we can build FTTP for the same price as New Zealand. We've debunked this comparison with facts and realities that were based on decisions back in 2009 and are irreversible today. And then you make the offer of talking more about New Zealand. So if I could ask you a bit further about the comparison. I do note that you say that people here are comparing us with Kenya, which seems a little far-fetched, but perhaps if New Zealand is a little more comparable, if you could perhaps have a chat about what you understand you may have been there, had a look at it.
Mr. Rue has, yes.
Do you want me to answer that?
Please.
So there's a couple of differences there's many differences between the Australian model and the New Zealand model. The first difference is what I just referred to, is the fact that in the cost per premise which we report on fibre to the premise, which is $4,400, within there's around about $1,000 which relates to payments to Telstra for either leasing or for purchasing assets. That $1,000 wouldn't exist if an incumbent telco, if you will, which is what happened in New Zealand, was setting up that business. On top of that, the cost per premise in New Zealand, the costs relate to going from what they call VDSL, or what we call fibre to the node, to fibre to the premise. So they have already pulled fibre from exchanges to the node. That is not included. So there's a shorter cable run, if you like, a shorter civil build from the node to the home rather than from the exchange to the home, and that can be multiple kilometres that we're talking about, and several, well, in fact, up to $400 difference. On top of that, in New Zealand, they have about a third of their connections are done aerially. In Australia, it's 15% is aerially. So we have, and the difference between.
Can you just explain that?
Sorry, so they're done by overheads rather than having to dig underground. The difference in connection cost, which I think I told this hearing a couple of years ago, is around about $500. So an aerial is $500 cheaper than an underground connection. The chorus cost per premise for fibre to the premise includes greenfields and brownfields. Our $4,400 just includes brownfields. Greenfields is substantially cheaper, $2,000 cheaper. So again, if you were to do a weighted average like New Zealand do, that would be $100 less in ours. On top of that, we have the geographical situation in Australia is different than New Zealand. We have rates for our what we call LNDN. Our average rate is $2,000. That can range from $1,500 to $2,500 depending on the geographic land. In New Zealand, where they have what they call non-standard installs, where some installs are really, really expensive for businesses, for example, the government will provide a subsidy for that, whereas here it is this company is paying for that. And then, of course, there is labour rates, which are different, but there's also exchange rate difference, so that's probably a smaller issue. But really, that's a long way of saying that the problem with cost per premise is that it is not a standard measure around the world. It is often measuring different things, and I've just described how this is different things. We were very clear. In fact, I gave about a 10-minute presentation to this hearing to explain how we do cost per premises. We've always been clear in our annual report and in our corporate plans how we do it. Unfortunately, it's because it's not an international measure, comparing like for like often is not the right way to do it. Personally, I'm comfortable that the costs that we've incurred are not overblown. In New Zealand, although their costs have come down, that's because they did expensive areas first and then they went to cheaper areas. It's not due to some radical change in the way they're rolling out. So it really is, you really are comparing two different things.
So in summary, and I'll finish on this question, so in summary, the similarities between Australia and New Zealand, apart from the fact that they had an incumbent telecommunications company that had a lot of the infrastructure and it wasn't saddled with paying themselves billions of dollars worth of fees that you're saddled with now under this very generous contract in 2011. So that's different. They've already had quite a bit of fibre to the node and it's shorter, so it's a lot cheaper to actually install. They do a third of their connections by air, which is what you said, about $500 a household cheaper.
For us, I don't know.
Yes,
I don't know for them.
It's all part of the cost that you have to incur, and geographically they're very different from us. We've got a lot more distances to cover and a lot more households, I'd imagine, that are much more expensive to get at.
And theirs is greenfield and brownfield together.
And greenfield and brownfield. So apart from that, it's identical.
It's very different.
Yeah.
If I could,
Please, Mr. Morrow.
Another point that I found interesting and applicable to us, even on the Four Corners interview, you saw the Chorus executive being interviewed. The fibre, because they're still running fibre to the node and fibre, their fibre take-up rate is less than 40%. That was said on the Four Corners show. That is what we've been told by the Chorus people. Also, what was said on the Four Corners people, echoed by the executives of Chorus, is that people are happy with their FTTN service, that there is a good speed out there. And it isn't just, people aren't knocking on the door to say, let me convert over from my copper-based fibre to the node, like what Australia is deploying for 4 million homes to get onto fibre. So again, I think it comes back to my Dubbo example of, is this really what people want right now? Again, I reserve judgment for what the future will hold, and maybe that's what New Zealand's thinking. Maybe that's what our upgrade plan is all about. But for today's needs right now, I think that, it reinforces the MTM mix that we're deploying here in the country.
So just to conclude on the point on this contract, so when you came in, yes? Well, if you'll actually let me finish.
Well, I've been waiting for the question to come on the last three questions.
Oh, so it was okay before.
So it was okay for Senator Urquhart to make these widely unsubstantiated allegations without a question. Thank you. So just to be very clear, that this, when the NBN was set up and they went into this contract, did it alone, went into this 2011 contract with Telstra and presumably Optus, that you were saddled with this debt, which now has to be transferred to all NBN users into the future, at least $15 extra a month per subscription. And there's no way you can get out of that.
Not a feasible way out of it. Not unless we go build our own ducts, take a very alternative path to do that. That is correct.
Which is not feasible, is it?
No.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Morrow was out briefly and I came in and I heard a few questions around pricing, so I may re-prosecute a little bit of territory, but I just want to follow a line of questioning. And I encourage you to be as frank with us as you possibly can, because on a number of occasions in the past I've asked you questions about matters that you've disclosed in the last 48 hours to the television station that we didn't get fulsome answers here, particularly with regard to the corporate plan. But let's just start with pricing in the little bit of time.
Those are 6 in the morning, these are 10 at night. I'm a morning person.
Well, I'll bear that in mind when we have our next hearing and see if we can both be here at 6. Mr. Morrow?
All right.
Yeah.
There's lots of things we do early in the morning. Mr. Morrow?
I do not want to know that.
Mr. Morrow?
Should we read between the lines?
With reference to the current pricing review, can you please outline what options NBN is currently modelling?
Yes, so the pricing review, to be sure every committee member is aware, is part of the consultation process that we use with our retailers to tell them that we're looking at new pricing, any ideas that they have. We sample some suggestions and we try to gather, and if you can imagine, it's a little bit like herding cats because lots of different RSPs are involved, lots of them have very different opinions, different marketing strategies, but we try to get what the majority kind of like in terms of the ideas that we start with. So we have evaluated eliminating the CVC and only having one AVC fee that has a near unlimited usage behind that. We have evaluated what's commonly referred to as kind of a 95th percentile billing. This is where you don't get to block the customer. Whatever your customer uses, we'll give you a bill at the end of that month, but we'll only charge you up to 95th percentile of what was used. Therefore, we're giving you that last 5th percentile away. Again, it's a common pricing structure in the telco land for leasing services in particular. We looked at other alternatives of just kind of changing the pricing structure altogether. And from these...
What do you mean by that, Mr. Morrow?
So should we bundle things together? Should you include a degree of CVC along with an AVC price? Should we change even the price overall, the current discount that we've already given on CVC? Should we be even more aggressive than what we have been? All of these things get considered. We ask the RSPs what they think. Now, again, just to set a visual for you, they don't all sit around the room and reveal their secrets to their competitors. So it's usually one-on-one that we get this sort of feedback from those retailers. And then once we have that first round, we kind of massage that data, think, okay, this might be the most liked type of approach acceptable to NBN, the most preferred by the RSP, and then we go back to them again, a second round, and say, now what do you think of this? They give us their ideas and views back. They may say, here's some other suggestions. We get that information back, and that is the stage that we are right now with this pricing review. So we have 2 rounds of gathering input from the retailers, of discussing potential options of how pricing can change, and now we are hard in the detail of evaluating what we think will be the best solution to be able to take to the market that can ensure that we recover the cost of this expensive network build, that we can set the retailers up for success in a way that gives that end user a better experience than what they're currently having today. And I will be open with you. We set it up, or we're looking at how can we incent people to move up higher on the speeds than the 12 and the 25 that is the most dominant products that are out there. We'd love people to be on the 50. We think the 50 megabit per second plan is a good one. We think it satisfies almost every application and need of households that are out there today. There might be some exceptions, but again, we have higher price points for that. So that's what we're looking at, Senator. We're still weeks away from having an answer, and we'll go back with more information that we'll communicate to the retailers once we get through this particular phase.
Okay, so if there's anything that you want to provide further to what you've said to me in writing, to even more clearly outline that, I'd be very happy to receive that. Could I ask what revenue objectives do the options need to achieve in the way that you're configuring your modelling?
So again, it comes down very simple. When we add up, when Stephen and his team do the analysis over, here's our cost per prem of this MTM model, Here's the operating cost of maintaining that network. Here's what we have to pay for insurance. Here's what we're going to have to pay on interest now that we're having a debt factor come into the business, and salaries, everything else that's typically on a P&L statement, a profit and loss statement. From that, we calculate out how much revenue that we would need. And with a 75% take-up, we need to get about $52, Stephen, of ARPU. And if we can collect that over this sustained period of time, then we can actually pay for this complete transformation of what we've done here in Australia for the 2 million homes that didn't have it, for a network that has far more capability than the old ADSL capability of the past. That's the revenue measures or objectives that we have. Very simple. We need 3/4 of the population to take this up, and $52 a month that the retailers should be paying us. So this is why, if we had guarantees, as an example, where if the retailer said, we'll guarantee you 75% take up, and we'll pay you $52 a month, we're not really fussed about the CVC. Sometimes you have capacity expenses of upgrading capacity if usage climbs up too much, and you could take provisions to be able to do that. But that's really what this is about. If I can, because again, we spent a bit of time on studying New Zealand. Their product prices in the mid-40s, mid to high 40s is what they charge their retailers. If you take out this $22 that we talked about earlier, we'd be at $30. So you can kind of see where even at $52, we're not that far off. It is more, I will give you that. But again, the circumstances here in Australia are different than New Zealand.
So to be clear, the options that you're considering and the framework that you've just described there are restricted to achieving the ARPU targets that are in the corporate plan?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Are you looking at any scenarios that sit outside that?
No.
The NBN chairman
Sorry, Chair, just to be sure, in terms of the revenue recovery, the answer is no, nothing outside of the revenue recovery. One year might be a little bit different than the other year, depending on the take-up rates. So as we go through and we do this analysis, we may see that next year is a little bit less than what the corporate plan is, but we make up for it the year after. That could very well happen, depending on what pricing option we choose.
Okay, but that requires assumptions about the future that you just told us in previous responses that you can't predict and you don't really know. So how valid then is your
But we can see,
modelling?
We look very closely over the 4 or 5 year horizon, and that's really what we're referring to.
So sometimes it's clearer and other times it's not. So
no, it's always the closer in time, it's clear, Senator. I mean, it's just common everyday life. What do you think you're going to be doing in 40 years' time versus what are you going to be doing in 4 weeks' time?
I don't think we'll be here discusing this, Mr. Morrow, in 40 years' time. I'm reasonably confident
I actually
about
hope
that.
not. So.
The NBN chairman gave a speech a few weeks back, and he appeared to signal that not much would change in the short term. And I guess my question is that a reflection of the company's current thinking?
Well, again, I think we should be careful with what relative change means. Is it a complete pricing revamp where everything's off the table and it's half the price of what we're charging today? No, it's not going to be that. Remember, these are evolutionary steps that we take with pricing. We want to be bold. We want to solve for the concerns that are out there today while we still are able to pay for this network. And that we believe will come up with a solution. But the chairman was absolutely spot on. This is not having the rates that we have out there. It's not that kind of magnitude of change.
Okay. In terms of the current 2 tariff structure, what modified speed tier options are being considered?
So we have evaluated almost everything was on the table for consideration. So again, to give you an idea of that, we debated whether the 12 meg product should remain. Should we remove that?
Yeah.
And people just get up to 25 meg as the entry level service. We debated whether we should take the 6 different products that we have and carve that down to 2 or 3. That was one of the suggestions made by a couple of the RSPs. And you know, we again, as I mentioned earlier, we looked at should we be bundling an amount of CVC to be inclusive in an AVC price to where, one, the RSP does not have to worry about all of the algorithms and robots that people are trying to develop to manage this for a customer experience, and that it just gives them a bit of safety and freedom that I know I can get customers on. I know I'm not going to congest them at busy hour. So these are the sorts of things that are, in fact, being considered.
Under a flat access fee, what speed tier options are being considered?
I'm sorry?
Under a flat access fee,
Yes.
what speed tier options are being considered?
So this is if we eliminated the CVC and had only one fee per month, like what Chorus does in New Zealand. Again, we looked at keeping the same speed architecture in that model. And if I can explain that, Senator, because this is really important, we could simplify our life just by saying, you know what, let's put one price point out there. You get as much bandwidth as you want, you know, or all you can eat model, and let's call it $52 for that, and go for your life. The problem with that is that it defeats the purpose that I believe NBN originally stood for, and I believe stands for today, and that everybody in this nation should have broadband. I may be on a fixed income. I can't pay $100 for that super fast broadband, but I can pay $30 and at least be able to do search online and buy online products and have a little bit of education that comes through. And that's what we want to make sure that we protect. For those people that can't afford the super high speeds, let's give them a speed and a service that they can afford. And that's why you have a 12 meg product for people that say, I don't need 100, and I can't afford it anyway, so I'll buy a 12. So we don't want to eliminate that. You know, we don't want that 75% to shrink because, again, the economic model needs to stay whole.
So given that expression of an understanding of what you think the NBN should be offering, what speed tier options are being considered with a flat fee access model?
Again, we looked at all of them, whether or not we should do all of them. It is, you know, I'll say right now, that's the least interesting option, to have a one price, all you can eat plan that goes out there. Again, for the reasons that I mentioned, the difficulties behind it. You remember that part of the pricing mechanism that I do think was quite clever set up back in 2010 by the former management team. They put together this AVC fee with the CVC charge, which is almost like a usage-based charge. Now, the beauty of that is while today, or let's call it even 2010 type of usage, that was going to be far lower than what 2020 will be. But if you had to recover the cost, which was the original model, and you assumed that you got to pay that 2020 fee today, we would have been paying a lot more from the beginning of NBN, $52 in the MTM model, even more in the 92% fiber model. And instead, because usage is lower and it will grow, the NBN, the company's taken the bet on that growth coming through, and therefore the CVC is the mechanism that will actually raise that price as we go forward. So it was, by all accounts, a beautiful architecture. What we're seeing right now is that with millions of homes coming up available for sale, 180 different brands trying to compete with it, they just really need something far more simple to be able to get people to move in. Thank you.
You said earlier that you hope to sort of get through this phase pretty soon. When do you expect to reach a landing?
The price consultation phase. So
Yeah.
we're hoping that we can put something public by the end of the year. Timeframes are different. We also have to remember we're heavily
Before
regulated
Christmas? Will there be a Christmas present in it, Mr. Morrow?
There will be an announcement before Christmas. I promise you that, Senator.
Okay. If there is a change in the pricing structure, how long would it take for you to get that implemented?
So this is part of the issue. So, for example, let's say we take the current pricing structure, we're going to replace it with something far more clever for everybody, more attractive for everybody. You can't pull a product off so easily. It takes 2 years for us to give notice to these RSPs. And rightfully so. They've built IT systems. They've trained staff. They have customers that are on these products. So it's not like overnight, let's shut that one down and here I'll give you this new one. So we have to be very mindful and thoughtful about the evolutionary process of pulling products out of the market and replacing them with others. So our initial thinking is that we're going to introduce a new product on the top of these others, and that we'll think about, over time whether or not some of those need to be removed from market, but we're not at that point of making that decision. So my best estimate at this point is an announcement will come out that will explain our intent by the end of the year, that we hope to have something in the first half of next year that will be part of the new product, but we hope to bring benefit to the RSPs, to the end user, in a way that's still positive for NBN and have an impact very, very soon.
Okay, so that's sort of a structural response to how the RSPs would respond.
Yeah.
What about consumers?
Well, again, we don't control the consumers, so we're trying to think of plans that make sure that RSPs don't think, oh, great, I can pocket the money. Now, I want to be really careful because I don't even like saying that. I think these RSPs are good people. They're good companies. They care about customers. They want to do the right thing. They're up against a rock and a hard place in terms of this land grab phenomena. There's massive competition on price. They're trying to provide a good service and take care of these costs that we know are high for them.
The flat access fee with a charge then applying to data, do you consider that a feasible option?
A flat access fee with?
A charge applying to data on top of that.
Well, so that's what it is today. So again, whether you send one bit of data in and out of your house, your RSP is going to pay us, if you bought a 25 meg product, they're going to pay us $27, whether you use or send or receive data or not. How much data you send or receive, and all of those other customers that belong to that RSP that we transport to this point of interconnect where their network attaches to ours, how much you can all send at the same time is the second fee. That's the CVC fee.
Yes.
So that's a data usage fee, if you can think about it that way. And that is today's construct, that you can either buy a little bit, which means you're going to slow people down when they're all trying to use it at the same time, or you can buy a lot and let them free flow.
Yep.
We're thinking about pricing mechanisms that kind of find the balance in there. Because again, the beauty of the way that the previous management team and the previous government approved that pricing construct is that we'll recover money as more applications come into the home, as more value is presented to the home, and therefore more data consumption comes between the home over NBN network and into the RSP. That's a really important growth mechanism that keeps the price level down. And that's why I don't think there's too many people like the idea of a single price, all-you-can-eat component, if we have to put it at the cost recovery level, which is $52. They won't buy it. But if we can do something to say, how about we have a far more attractive price that gives you a 50 meg speed product, and we have some inclusive CVC that comes with that and an attractive growth rate thereafter, now we're talking. Now we seem to get people saying we're interested in that. What we need to do now, that Stephen's team is very aggressive on, along with Brad Whitcomb's team, is how can we actually massage all this, make sure it works, make sure we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's. That's the work that's going on. It's intense, but we've got a good team of people that are working on it.
Can I just touch on a matter that we've discussed on a number of occasions, Mr. Morrow, which is the NBN Speeds database, which you have, and we know that you have this information. Is there any reason why NBN Co can't integrate its maximum attainable speeds database into its website?
Senator, we can do anything technically. With money and technology, there's so much that we can do. I would actually personally wait. I think that the minister has directed the regulatory bodies to be quite aggressive on looking at all things customer experience right now, and I think they're going to probably come up with solutions. But I don't know if you want to comment on that, Mitch.
Well, we as you know, Senator, have the ACMA who are undertaking work to look at what the customer experience is we're in the business of transparency. I think at the moment, in terms of the database that you're referring to, NBN provides that information to the retailers, and the retailers are the conduit to the consumers.
We've discussed this a few times, and the problem is that millions of people across Australia do not have access to the information that allows them to make an informed decision about what they're actually able to buy or not able to buy. But that information exists. It exists with the company of which you're a shareholder, Minister.
The consumer talks to the retailer about the product.
I know how it works, Senator Fifield.
That's right for them, and the retailer has the data from NBN as to what particular lines can support. So the retailer is in a position to say to the consumer, okay, this is something that we can sell to you given the capabilities of that line.
The buyer can't even be aware because they can't see. Mr Morrow, if the shareholder minister who's sitting there beside you decided or directed you to make this information available, are there any red flags for you?
I will do whatever the minister asks.
Are there any big problems that you could see, Mr Morrow?
Well, I think there's a right way to do it, Senator, is why I'm hesitating. And if I could, please allow me to entertain
Not put the minister on the spot tonight and say, give the information to Australians so they
know.
actually know.
This quite frankly, is should we mandate that the retailer, if the consumer asks, what's the maximum speed I could get, that the retailer tell them? Isn't that the appropriate way to deal with this? Because we do provide that information to the retailer. In my view, NBN should not be the police.
At this point of time,
yes,
given the lack of trust that people have in this whole process, isn't it time for the minister to direct you to make that database available to the Australians who are paying for this network? Isn't it time, Mr Morrow?
I think if we ask the RSPs that they may be willing to do this. I think the RSPs are intent on being transparent and giving a good service. I think they are the appropriate entities to do this. Senator, what I would strongly suggest is through the roundtable effort that the minister has set up with us, we're seeing some amazing collaboration occurring across the CEOs of the top retailers, myself, the regulatory bodies, rethinking how to make sure we get the right experience. I think we could solve this in the roundtable.
Minister Fifield, will you direct NBN to make this data that they hold available to the Australians who need it to make an informed choice about purchasing NBN?
Senator, I'm not going to make any unilateral declarations sitting here in Senate Estimates Committee at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. I think the appropriate approach is to talk to the retailers who, in a sense, own the customers and are the conduit of information to the customers, to talk to them about what is the best mechanism to ensure that customers have the best information about what their lines can support, which is an important factor for consumers determining what product they purchase from the retailer. So I think that's the appropriate way to address this issue.
Just before I move on to a new topic, final question, if I can, Mr Morrow. Would putting the information that we're talking about on your website cause any harm?
I would assume that the retailers would say they'd rather be talking to the customer about what the capabilities and what's the best product for them. We have had direct conversations to where they say, when it comes to consumer information, NBN, we'd rather you play the role of wholesaler and step behind the curtain, let us do that.
That's a preference, but is there a likelihood of any harm?
Well,
other than to the will of the RSPs?
Well, I wouldn't want to speculate at 10:30 at night either, Senator.
Yeah. We don't get to choose the time that we're here. I want your fulsome answer and I want the truth.
We would want to talk to the RSPs. This is a joint venture, really, between NBN as the wholesaler and the retailers. The retailers have the customer interface, so we want to make sure that the way that information is conveyed is the most appropriate and beneficial for the customers to make an informed decision.
Mr Morrow, if the Minister directed you to make this available, are there any red flags?
I would have to consider that, Senator.
Thanks.
Senator Urquhart.
Yep. Mr Morrow, I want to take you to page 54 of the 2018 corporate plan, and in that is a table on operating expenses. So can you just run me through what types of costs? There's a line item there, it's the second one down, that says other OPEX. Can you just tell me and run through what type of costs are actually captured by that other OPEX line item? And it's
Sorry, Senator, you said page 54.
Yep.
That's section 5.2. And
That's right.
And
Yep.
I'm sorry, your question again, please?
So can you just run me through what types of costs are captured by the other OPEX line item? So it's the second line item down, and it starts off with financial year 17, 1.8.
Senator, can I refer you to the same table? I think you're talking about table 5.2. If I refer you to the words underneath.
It's 5.2, and then it's
Yep.
got table 6.
Yes, can I refer you to the words underneath? If you
Yep.
go to what is the third paragraph.
Yep.
Other operating costs include staff-related costs, network
Yep.
operations, assurance, restoration, maintenance,
Yep.
IT costs, marketing, communications, leasing, and other overheads.
So that's the complete package of what's included in other OPEX?
They would be the principal costs. There would
Okay.
obviously be other smaller costs, but they would be the principal
What
costs.
sort of things would be the smaller things?
Training isn't mentioned, for
Right.
example,
Yep.
or
Which would be incidental, or
yeah, I mean,
in terms of the amount?
well, mind you, that will be in staff-related costs. You were talking about smaller costs, Senator.
Yeah, okay. So that what's included in that third paragraph is predominantly
Yes, it
what
is.
is covered in that line
Yes,
item?
it is.
Yeah, okay. So when you compare that line, that other OPEX, between the 2017 and 2018 plans, there looks like there's a trend. And in the 2017 plan, the document forecasts a steady year-on-year increase in OPEX from it's 1.7 billion in financial year 17 to 2.1 billion in financial year 20. There's a similar trend in the 2018 plan, with the exception of financial year 20,
Yes.
which reports a $200 million reduction
Yes.
in operational expenditure relative to the 2017 plan.
Yes.
So can you outline where that $200 million in cost savings are actually coming from?
Yes, I can, Senator, certainly.
Yep.
We spent quite a bit of time, actually, when we were preparing this plan, looking at the long-term costs in our business and
The long-term
costs in
Yep.
our business and the,
Yep.
and the things that we ought to be looking at to reduce those costs over time.
Yep.
You would see, if you go to the capital expenditure line, that we're also anticipating to spend a little bit more costs, for example, in IT.
Yep.
So we're doing some IT developments over the next few years, which will reduce costs, labour costs, for example, network operating costs.
Yep.
We've also...
So, sorry, just in terms of, so you're upgrading IT, which means that the labour costs will come
Yes,
down.
so-
So that means a reduction in employees, is that?
Well, it may not be just employees. It could be network operating costs.
Yep.
We've looked at procurement. We've looked at contracts to see whether that we should be targeting more aggressive procurement practices going forward. We've looked at the structures, for example, structures of departments, and saying, should we be running departments at a cheaper rate? We've looked
Yep.
at our marketing communications costs, frankly, all our costs,
Yep.
and we've really we believe that from the last corporate plan to this corporate plan that we can reduce those costs by, I think you mentioned, $200 million.
Yeah, okay, so that takes into account all those. When you talk about contracts and procurement, what do you mean by that?
Well, we have long-term contracts for IT maintenance costs, for assurance, costs, maintenance costs in the network, for example, procuring equipment. So it's really all I'm saying is that we looked at all our cost base as part of this plan, and we looked at things that we could do without IT, things that we could do with IT developments, and as a result of that, we reduced our cost base in the long-term plan.
Yeah. And in terms of structures of departments, can you just add a little bit of information to how in what sort of way are you looking at I presume when you talk about structures of department, you're talking about restructuring departments.
Well, not necessarily.
How they operate,
one of the challenges that we call out in the plan is the move from largely a construction or a build business to an operating business, and that then leads to changes in mix of staff that's needed, changes in skills that needed.
So you're not going to have as many people out in the field.
Well, yeah. For example, if I look at my own accountabilities, if I have less equipment to purchase, there would be less staff needed, for example. So we really just had a close look at what our staffing levels. Sure. That's just one example, though, Senator. Let's not just focus on staff.
No. I'm not. That's why I'm asking you to give me a broad sort of picture. So have these savings been brought forward from 2021?
No, I think the savings you can see the savings carry on to fiscal 21. No, I think it's fair to say that we had a closer look at our long-term cost base when we did this plan, and that's the reason you're seeing those savings. Okay.
So did the 2017 corporate plan to reduce other OPEX by 200 million in financial year 2021?
The corporate plan didn't go past fiscal 20, Senator. I can't recall what we would have had in our internal numbers. Okay.
So I know that you said that it was broader than staff, but will staff be impacted in these sort of different arrangements that you've proposed?
Well, I would look at it that we have been hiring a substantial number of staff, Senator, in the last few years, and I think it's fair to say that the rate of hiring staff will significantly reduce because of as we move from building and operating a network to we'll still be building, of course, but primarily operating a network, and the rate at which we're acquiring staff will reduce. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you know by how many?
I don't have those numbers here, Senator, sorry.
Right. Do you have them?
I would have them, yes.
Would you be able to provide them on notice?
Let me take that on notice, Senator.
So the operational expenditure for financial year 21, does this represent the steady state OPEX?
No, I think that we would always be looking at reductions of OPEX going forward in terms of the model, though I was talking about earlier, that is probably what was carried forward, but we would always be looking at ways in which we can run our business more efficiently. Always will. Yeah, okay. And at what rate are operating costs assumed to grow over time? At inflation. Just the rate of inflation? No. Yes. No more, no less? No more than that. At that rate, right. I think that's all I've got on that subject. Thank you.
Senator O'Neill.
Thank you very much.
To probably take us out, I suspect.
Yes. I'm so lucky to have this spot so frequently as we meet. I do. Can I go to the fixed wireless congestion that we're hearing about? So, Mr. Murray, I've given you the opportunity in the past to explain key things that are happening. So right now, what are the issues with the congestion in fixed wireless towers? Talk me through what's happening there, please.
So, as with any wireless network, there is what they call breathable cells, and so as more people breathable cells.
Breathable cells. Thank you.
So this is when more people are using it at the same time. There's kind of a bit of a contraction. It slow speeds down, and there's some modulation schemes involved in that actually have a slower speed degradation the further are you out on the cell.
It's like traffic.
Sort of, yes. So the idea behind that, though, is that we should be designing and engineering to be able to accommodate people to where they don't see much congestion. Now, as I said, very few wireless networks, in fact, none that I'm aware of, are congestion-free. They all have contention built within. The current state for our fixed wireless network, as we're adding up customers, occasionally we'll see growth that will occur higher than what we had planned, and that we need to get out and add some extra capacity there. So I believe the statistic that I was just looking at last week had less than 1% of the cells that were seeing the speed degrade down to a level that was below the design. So the team jumps on that really quickly.
So what's that level when you talk about below the design?
It could drop down to 3 megabit per second was the speed that it could go down to. Now this was the original
the
design.
speed that it goes down to when it's congested, or is that the speed at below which you think there's a problem? Can you clarify that for me?
I'm sorry, what
So-
are you asking?
When that number 3 that you just talked about, is that what they're going down to, or is that the floor?
No, that means they could be hitting 3 megabit per second.
So that's a description of what they're receiving.
Correct. That's
Gotcha.
less than 1% of the cells that we have out there that could hit that. So the team...
What's the standard you try to get to, or that you try to maintain? What's like the base?
Well, so 6 megabits is now the new design standard that we want to make sure. And that is, so if you're buying a 12 meg product, we want to make sure at least during the busy time on a fully loaded cell that you never drop below 6 megabit per second.
And is that an increase on previous standards or a decrease?
It is an increase. The design that was put together back in 2010, 2011 used 3 megabits per second as the design criteria. So we've doubled that. We also are looking at, as we're loading up the network with more and more take-up, we're actually examining right now whether or not 6 megabits is the right level. Should we be increasing that as we go forward?
Okay. So can I ask what impact will this problem have on peak speeds during peak hours if the backhaul on the NBN tower is congested? And that we have heard some households and businesses who can't get any more than 6 megabits per second during peak hour. And presumably this would be impacting at least, maybe 100 other users at the same time.
So we're doing a couple of things right now. We're, first of all, making sure that if you buy one of the higher speed products, like the 50 meg product, that you actually don't fall as low as what a 12 meg product would drop down to. We're also
Sorry, could you just say that again? So people are buying a 50 meg product?
Yes.
And
So-
they would expect to get the 50 meg product that they purchase?
Yes, but again, every network is contended. So just as the ACCC is putting out guidelines saying that even for a standard offer product, you may fall to 60% of your headline speed during the busy hour period. So again, that's largely the way that the mobile and fixed wireless networks are designed. Ours is no different. It does the same thing. Now, we haven't seen as many people in congestion down to that level as the design calls for, because the percent of people that ultimately will load up that cell has been far lower. This is the sales process of ultimately getting more and more people onto this fixed wireless network. That's why we've realized that the 3 meg design from back in 2010 is inadequate, and that we're lifting it to the 6. We're also looking at now, all right, if depending on the mix of how many 50s, how many 25s, how many 12 products are out there, should we be looking at actually having even more capacity to be sure that that minimum speed during the busiest part of the day doesn't go below a certain level, and that's under review right now.
Okay. So if that's under review, could you give me an idea of how many of these towers around the country are experiencing problems? Because I'm sure you'd have to have that as a basic piece of information for you to be able to do the work.
Less than 1% is my...
So what's that in raw numbers for me?
Number of cells that we have. Stephen, do you have?
1,500 built.
We'll see if we can't get that answer to you before, in 10 minutes. A challenge for the...
So I've got no idea of the scope. How many towers roughly? I mean, even if you can't get it perfect.
Well, so if you want to look at it on an even distribution basis with 200,000 customers on the network, you can take less than 1% of that 200,000. So we're talking typically hundreds of customers that would be impacted by this in terms of falling down into that level.
Okay, so, but my question was about how many towers.
Right, it doesn't, it's actually cells, which is different than the towers, so. That's right. That's all right.
Okay, I might need to understand.
You put up a tower,
Yep.
and you can have a cell going in this direction and a cell going in this direction. So you can have multiple cells on the same tower.
Right. So how many
I don't-
towers? I can still ask that. How many towers are experiencing these problems?
I don't know.
So how many
Send it out
towers
to
and how many cells? If you can find that in the next 10 minutes, I'll be very, very
you.
pleased.
We'll see if we can find that out
it's-
for you.
Thank you very much. You must have, well, you've indicated that you've got a plan.
1,682 towers that are currently live.
1,682
that are
live,
currently
yep.
live. I think at the end we've about 2,500, but at this stage 1,682, and 1% of that is 16.
And
That's-
16.
That's towers.
That's
Do
towers.
we need to get cells? Or
Now-
Yes.
now-
And
Yeah.
how many cells? Then we'll find out at some point of time.
Yeah, we're
Working on it. We're working on it. Thanks very much. That'd be great. Mr. Morrow, to address this problem, have you got a spot map of the hot spots where this congestion is happening for each tower? So,
No, I'm
like, you
sure
know
we
which
know-
cells are working and
I'm
not
sure we
working?
know which ones they are, but I don't have a spot map on it, no.
So how do you not have a spot map if you know which ones they are?
Because it's in a database somewhere where people are monitoring each one of these cells and the performance. I look at the aggregate that tells, because I want to know if anybody's fallen below the design criteria, and that's why I can tell you it's less than 1%. So we evaluate that to make sure that that actually gets then restored with capacity expansion to where we don't fall below that level. But I don't have the stats to tell you where the number is, but our team does.
Great. Would you be able to provide me with that? So I get a sense of exactly where the problem is.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So when this is identified, what's the usual response time from when you figure out the congestion's happening to when an upgrade occurs, using that data that you're going to provide to me?
It varies on what the magnitude is, but it gets restored fairly quickly. I'll happy to take that note on notice too, to let you know how quick we can actually respond and get out there to upgrade this capacity.
So we're talking days, weeks or months?
I'll take it on notice, Senator.
You've got a better idea than me with the technology, Mr. Morrow, is it?
At 5 minutes to 11, it's been a long day, it's been a long week, a long month.
I think it's going to get longer, Mr. Morrow.
No, listen, we'll take it. You know,
Only 5 minutes longer.
Yeah, there's a few years to roll out yet.
You are right.
Could you take me through the technical side of things that's involved with an upgrade of such a tower or the cells on a tower to improve the fixed wireless congestion problem?
well, we'll take that on notice and we'll do a little diagram for you.
Okay. And Minister Fifield, have you been briefed on these fixed wireless towers?
I have.
Do you want to add any clarity to my understanding of this?
What Mr. Morrow has shared with you is essentially what Mr. Morrow has briefed me on.
Okay, and can I ask when that occurred?
Within the last week or so. Yeah.
Okay, so you should be able to get some data for me pretty quickly then.
The data that I just gave you?
Yeah, the little bits that are around the edge, yeah. The cells. Okay. Mr. Morrow, would you have any concerns about the ACCC speed monitoring trial being expanded to consider the fixed wireless network?
No, I would not.
Okay. And could I just ask if you make retail providers aware of when the fixed wireless tower is a bottleneck during peak hours and other times? Who do you not know?
Well, again, they understand that congestion occurs in the networks.
But when you know where it is, what's your process of advising the providers?
I don't know. They may be with our people that look after the retailers. They may be on top of that and send that over. I'm happy to take that on notice if you like.
Okay. And would that be a relatively quick process to undertake?
I don't know.
Extended?
Yeah, we'll check.
If you could find out that, because it would be important for them to have clear transparency over what's going on with the network and the shortcomings.
Yes.
So they can communicate with their customers. I have got just another topic I'd like to crack open just before we go. with regard to the recent NBN local announcement, could you explain briefly what practical changes this will actually introduce?
4 minutes to go, and Karina almost got through this without answering a question, but Karina.
Are you sure? So it's a reallocation of...
Can I stop you there?
Yes.
203 cells.
Thank you very much.
Oh, out of time. Sorry, Karina.
Okay.
Well, good answer, Karina.
Ms. Keisler.
A reallocation of existing resources, but also enhancements to processes so that we can better address issues in regional Australia.
Okay, so you haven't employed any additional staff?
No.
And is it a restructure from the existing corporate affairs, government relations and community affairs resources?
Yes.
All of those?
Well,
or?
it's community, yes, it is, exactly that. In addition to about 150 network engineers who are based around the country, field deployment people who have a dotted line sort of virtual network reporting into my team that it enables us to respond faster to issues that come out of regional Australia.
Okay, so to be clear, there are no additional new people, so that the NBN local program is not additional resources, it's a reshaping of current resources.
Confirmed.
And given the concerns that are there, why has the NBN waited till basically halfway through the rollout to put these resources in to help MPs deal with customer service problems in their electorates?
We've had a very long-standing relationship with regional electoral officers, local councils and industry bodies. What we've done is an assessment of the processes to make it easier to deal with where we're at in the build in regional Australia. So we're at 75% of the rollout in regional Australia. As more areas move from RFS to the cut-off, to the migration period, it's a change in the way that we need to engage with these communities. So it's gone beyond inform to assistance with issues raised, to continuing information around how you can make the best out of the network that you now have access to, where previous it was largely town hall briefings that informed around what was coming and what you could expect, etc. So there is a slight nuance there in terms of what communication approach we're taking, but also as the numbers have increased and as reflected across the rest of the network, issues are arising, as you'd expect of a network build of this nature, and so we've restructured our processes and people to better deal with those.
Do you really think it's just a communications problem, Ms. Keisler?
I can address that, Senator. I think when it comes to the regional communities, the satellite service, as that thing was brand new, cutting-edge technology, when it got loaded up, we saw issues that we needed to address. And there was a period of time to where the service was not up to standard of what those end users should have been receiving. We have
Mr. Morrow, can I ask three really quick, sharp questions? Have you got 25 NBN local staff in the field now? Is that correct?
26.
26, and are they all in place?
I believe we're still, yes.
Could you provide on notice a list of where they are?
Yes, I can.
How many are located in regional areas? Exactly where they're going to be, and what will the NBN local staff actually be able to do to help fix the customer problem that's different from what's been going on? Because I have to say, through my office, and I've told you on many occasions, we've had lots and lots and lots of reports, there hasn't been any palpable change.
So, this launched last week. We have 20 regional officers. My team moves a lot. They are very rarely sitting in an office. They're out in the field, as is their job. So we focus less on where their locations are and where the need is, and they move with the build. As we move into new areas, those people tend to get up and move with it. But then, if there's an area that requires more work, they will be located in that area. A lot of them live locally as well, and then you've got to tap the 150 network engineers that are also regionally based around the country.
The network engineers.
That concludes consideration of the Communications and Arts portfolios. So senators are reminded that written questions on notice should be provided to the Secretariat by close of business on Thursday, the 2nd of November. I take this opportunity to thank officers of NBN Co, of the Department, Minister, Secretariat staff, Hansard and Broadcasting as well. The committee is adjourned.
Thank you.
Chair, can I indicate there are just